Paul.
Jeremy, good to see you.
Yeah, thank you for doing this today.
No, a pleasure.
And of course, Happy Peace Day.
Happy Peace Day and congratulations with 25 years of Peace Days and the great impact you're having.
Thanks. And of course, it's been a massive team effort with thousands of people over the 25 years. Yeah, as you know well, none of these things happen without all sorts of amazing people contributing. And of course, I wanted to talk to you at this point because of the major contribution that you've had on Peace One Day, and we could talk about that a bit later. But before we do, I wanted to ask you, could you tell us about your work and your journey?
Well, what I'm doing now, because I never look back and say I was the X of here or the X of there, but I used to run Unilever for a decade, but I really focus on the future. I was very fortunate to help develop the Sustainable Development Goals when, at that time, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon set up a panel of 27 eminent people, as he called it, but he wanted representatives of business there as well, and which was a great foresight, I believe. And he asked me if I wanted to be on that panel. So for 2.5 years, we worked the Sustainable Development Goals. And as you well know, the objective is to not leave anybody behind, to irreversibly eradicate poverty and do that in a more sustainable and equitable way. Very much a driver for peace, if we talk that later. So I decided after my career in business that I really needed to get the private sector to move faster and help de-risk a political process that is pretty gridlocked. So what I do now is focus on collective action. I think collaborative leadership versus competitive leadership is especially needed on the issues that affect the future of humanity. So we bring industry collectives together to solve the bigger problems that individual companies cannot do alone. Think about climate change, think about plastics in the oceans, think about deforestation, think about human rights. So that's the first area. And then you obviously need to get money to flow. To make the Sustainable Development Goals come alive, we need to have $6-7 trillion to make that happen. We're barely at 1/3 of that. So we need to get more money to flow, which obviously requires working with the financial industry. So the second thing I do is we've set up impact funds, about $15 billion now, try to set the example of how you can get good returns, lower your risks increasingly so by focusing on these development areas. And the third one is an enabler. This is a leadership issue. We have the technology, we have the money, frankly. We know what to do. We have a lot of what they call proofs of concept on how to lift people out of poverty. But at the end of the day, it's human willpower. Many have said that this actually is not a crisis of poverty or food insecurity or climate change, but an issue of greed, of apathy, of selfishness. So that's why I focus on leadership as the third bucket. We've set up an organization that now works with 865 universities, for example, to change management education and create more holistic leaders and more moral leaders, what we need. So it's leadership, it's finance, and it's collective action.
And where do you think we are on the journey to shift the level of consciousness around these sort of fundamental issues?
So this is a huge change that needs to happen, and unfortunately, since we've waited so long, we don't have so much time to do it. But never in the history have we had to change our industrial system, which is heavily fossil fuel dependent, as you well know, since the Industrial Revolution, basically, and have to totally decarbonize that. Never ever before have we had to change major systems like our food and land use systems, for example. So these are major endeavors that are not easy. And unfortunately, they're coming at a time that because we've waited so long to address these issues, other things are starting to bubble up. We had the financial crisis, we have the COVID crisis. Now I would say we have a geopolitical crisis coming out of that. And it pulls people down to the here and now and distracts people from doing actually the right things for the longer term. So we've had some slippage. As a result, only 15% of the Sustainable Development Goals are on track. We set ourselves a timeline to achieve these goals between 2015 and 2030, and regretfully we have to be realistic. That might take us a little bit longer, but no reason to deviate from those goals. Obviously, the major area where we're increasingly paying the price is climate change itself. Our linear, extractive production and consumption model has come to an end. Since World War II, the population has quadrupled. Our consumption levels have gone up 3 times. 8 billion people now consuming well beyond their means, and yet still many more in poverty, and actually that number is increasing. This year, World Overshoot Day, which is the day that we use up more resources than the world can replenish, was August the 1st, which actually means, in my opinion, that every day after that, we're actually stealing from future generations. So this linear model is not anymore helping us. We can't have infinite growth on a finite planet. So that's where the bigger challenge is, living well beyond our means. So how do we adjust that so that it doesn't put the pressure on Mother Nature? Because we really can't afford it. And the invoices that are being sent are increasingly with higher velocity and higher intensity. The amounts of natural disasters we now have, the forests on fire, the borealis defrosting, the Arctics melting, all these things are signs of a world that's in stress. And unfortunately, we're at a difficult point, if I may be honest, where we've waited so long that, historically, Mother Earth's capacity to compensate for our shortcomings, she's running out of steam. The oceans have warmed up and can't absorb the heat anymore. The land masses have thoroughly degraded. The forests have been deforested, and so we're close to what some people call in science negative tipping points. And if you get to these negative tipping points, that's very dangerous. There are some people already saying, for example, that the Amazons are starting to emit more carbon than they absorb. That's not what you want. So these are the type of things that we need to watch now. So there is a sense of urgency. But, besides that there is a sense of urgency, it also makes enormous sense for many different aspects. It's, you want to have a world where everybody has an equal opportunity, where there is dignity and respect for all, or equity, or compassion. So a world where too many people feel they're not included or left behind is a world that's not at peace. We're at a point that we're now incurring more costs to deal with these issues than that it would actually cost us to solve them in the first place. So from a business point of view, I would say this is the biggest opportunity of the century. You'd be daft not to go after that. And then there's obviously the signals from the marketplace. You look at what the general population is looking for. They're looking for forests to walk in. They're looking for air to breathe. They're looking for decent jobs that give them security. And that requires you moving from the brown economy of the past, the destructive brown economy of the past, to increasingly the greener, more sustainable, more equitable economy of the future. It's a no-brainer in that sense. But yeah, it requires effort. Nothing is easy. Otherwise, some other people would have done it before us already. So can we muster that willpower? Itself a renewable resource. That is really the bigger question.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, as you know, we've always talked about peace and sustainability being inextricably linked. You can't have one or the other. On a day of peace, Peace One Day in its 25th year, as you know, has branched to, creating constructive narrative that informs, inspires, and engages around racism, around climate, around justice, around peace, around education, around violence against women, around food. I want to ask you to maybe explain that link between sustainability and peace, because when I hear you talk about the things you do, of course, in the context of a day of peace, I think, if we don't get these things right, then it's going to be we're going to live in a more violent world. Could you talk to us about that link between the two things?
In 2 sentences, it's very easy. When you go to bed hungry and don't know if you make it through the night, you'll probably look at your neighbors if you can steal food. If you live in an environment where there's no water, you probably look to your neighbors or neighboring countries to find it. If you look at the 25 countries that are most affected by climate change, 60% are at war. You cannot have peace without development, and you cannot have development without peace. They're integrally linked, and we obviously see that every day happening now. The fact that in Europe, the politics have become polarized in many countries, has often been linked to immigration, like you see in the US right now, a big issue in the polls, an obvious opportunity for populists or nationalists or xenophobics to drive us apart versus bring us together. But the roots of immigration, in many cases, is linked to poverty, is linked to scarcity of basic necessities like water, like you know, the opportunity, the climate change itself will be a big driver. We think in the next few decades there will be 200 to 300 million more people swirling the world as a result of that. Look at Latin America. The main reason this migration is happening now towards North America is entirely driven by climate change. There's a few exceptions, but entirely driven by climate change. So it's integrally linked. You cannot separate that. And that's why in the Sustainable Development Goals, we don't talk about climate change as the main goal. The main goal is to not leave anybody behind, to ensure that we have this inclusive society. Right now, if you look in this world, and you look at the costs that we incur in conflict prevention and wars, the area that you've brought attention to us all for, is about 10 to 12% of global GDP. Just on military spending, it's $2.5 trillion. But the devastating effects that we have on the economies, on people's livelihoods, on disruptions to our economic system are infinitely more. The 10 to 12% of cost in conflict prevention and wars is 3 times more than we need to spend to implement the Sustainable Development Goals and avoid the issues in the first place. And then we have the courage to call ourselves the most intelligent species. That doesn't add up. So bringing people to that level of consciousness, bringing these opportunities to people, which are now very much within our means because of technology, frankly, because of some directions in legislation, because of signals of the marketplace. And increasingly what we see, because 80% of the global economy comes from the private sector, from businesses driving these things, and very much concentrated in a few companies, in my opinion. But if we can make these companies aware of this huge opportunity there, which is not always easy to go after. There's vested interest from politicians. We have perverse subsidies. We have laws that might benefit the status quo versus the change. We have industries, especially the fossil fuel industry, that is frankly over and over more interested in slowing down this transition and accelerating it. So there are bumps on the road. But then after all, you cannot climb a smooth mountain. You need these bumps to build up more resilience to do it, to take a little breath when you start to go for the summit. So that's where we are. And sometimes it feels like we're doing 2 steps backwards. But it's good to point out to everybody that we're actually moving. We are moving. It's just that we aren't moving fast enough. This is an exponential problem that we're trying to address with linear solutions, and that doesn't work. It's a little bit Einstein's definition of insanity, trying to do the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. That doesn't work. We do have to change in a more dramatic way the way our economic system works.
So we're good at talking about it, and but kind of making it really happen at the speed of which it needs to happen is the thing that's in question here, isn't it? I mean, Paul, you know so much about the world and about the changes that need to be made. And I know that you have hope, and I know that you'll always, work to getting to the top of the mountain no matter what the situation. That's a given. We know that. Can we reverse this? I mean, because it seems to me that we hear these amazing conversations, and then when I look at what's going on in the world over the 25 years that I've been involved in this, I'm seeing something that's kind of seems to be going in the opposite direction of what we really need to be doing. It's almost like our DNA. It's almost like we're not capable of thinking beyond ourselves, and that the way in which we operate is very much we have to collect and control. And do you think that humanity has it in it to actually turn this situation around?
Well, First, I will acknowledge that there's a defeatist narrative out there that suits some people, and they're actively feeding that narrative. It's too late, we can't do anything anyway, we have more urgent problems that we need to solve, we don't have the money for it. You can come up with a lot of these arguments. But over and over and over again, science tells us that it can be done, and it can be done within a reasonable time frame. Obviously, the longer we wait, the more people are going to suffer. More people actually will lose their lives. 8 million people die every year now from air pollution alone. 825 million people go to bed hungry, and that number, unfortunately, is going up. I just don't want to be part of that. I don't want to earn my money and make my living by making things worse for others. It just doesn't seem to me a morally very justified way of doing things. But the reality is actually we are moving. Last year, the investments in green energy were about $1.8 trillion. That's 50% more than the investments made in fossil fuel. 30% of our energy is green already. Solar and wind is cheaper in 95% of the countries. In fact, there are 7 countries in the world that have already totally decarbonized. There are 47 countries that are ahead of the Paris Agreement, and they're doing well economically. So by all means, we have the proof points that this can be done, and we're actually moving. Think about it in an analogy of a combustion car, which I hate to use, but you're in second gear. We just need to accelerate to fourth gear, which is much easier than if you would be in reverse. If you're in reverse, you go to second gear, you blow up the engine. So it's easier where we are, I think, to rise to that level. But we're getting distracted. We're getting distracted for many different reasons, not least because of the lack of global leadership at a political level, at the self-interest of some of the private sector, at the confusion, frankly, at the citizens' level. There's so much out there that it's beyond often their understanding or their grasp. And then we're missing a big trick, because most of the economic growth is going to happen in the emerging markets, where there is an enormously young and dynamic population wanting to be part of this global economy. But, we punish them with COVID by not giving them the vaccines. We punish them in the financial crisis by not giving them money. They're debt-strapped, so we keep them on a little string. That's where most of the climate change is having devastating impacts, because they have less in adaptation or resilience that has been built there. And we continue to step on them. If we don't say that this is a global problem that we need to solve, that we're first and foremost connected as citizens of this world, and ensure that there is enough effort being given to those countries to lift them out of the situation they're in, then you have to think about the challenges that come with it, and it will take us longer. But solving we must. There is no way that we can live on this planet on a trajectory that gets us to 2.5 to 3 degrees, which we're currently on. Now, at the time of Paris, I was heavily involved in the COP21 in 2015 in Paris, and worked very much with the French government and many others. And this was the first time that we got business involved in a critical mass, if you want to. We were projecting to 4.5 degrees. People forget that. We were projecting to 4.5 degrees. At the time of Glasgow, which is not that long ago, only 4 years ago, we were still projecting to 3.5 degrees. So Glasgow brought us down to about the 2.5 level. Paris brought us down from 4.5 to about the 3.5 level. Now we need to get from the 2.5 level to the 1.5 level. That's a challenge. Some people said we're giving up on that one, but why give up when it's still possible? I wouldn't do that, actually. You see already now what the enormous effects are of the 1.5 degrees that we have, which is not 1.5 degrees, that's an average. It's already in some places in the world more. And humans have a hard time living in areas that are 40 degrees, and yet it seems to be normal now. Just Canada alone, because of the heat, you look at Canada, the forest fires that we've had this year in Canada has emitted more carbon into the atmosphere than the global airline industry together. So that's not a good thing. You just don't want that, And then it becomes pushing water uphill, which will be more difficult. And of course, we have options. We can go to nuclear. We have different fusion technologies coming in probably 10 years, 15 years time that are very, very encouraging. We can do biomimicry, which is basically imitating nature, and having some solutions that slow down the melting of our glaciers or put clouds in the sky to bring in some rain where we need it. We have geoengineering, which is another form of trying to capture this. And perhaps we are at the point, Jeremy, that we need all of them. Some of them were not my favorite. We certainly don't want to use it as an excuse for not knowing what we need to do. What we need to do is clear. We need to decarbonize our global economy. We need to change our food and land system, which causes 30% of the global warming. Think about methane, think about degrading land, think about deforestation as the main drivers. And we need to move to an economic system that has circularity. Only 8% of everything we produce in this world gets reused. I hear so many companies talk, for example, about plastics. It's a big issue. So many companies say, yeah, but I'm recycling now 2 or 3 times more plastic than I did before. Am I not great? And most of these sustainability reports talk about that. But if our plastic consumption over the last 4 decades has gone up 5 times, and we were 8% in recycling and we're still 8% in recycling now, there's a lot more plastic out there in the oceans. And that's what you see. So we're fooling ourselves a little bit by how we look at things. This whole notion of CSR, corporate responsibility, being a little bit less bad with carbon in the atmosphere, or a little bit less bad with plastics in the ocean, or with a little bit slower rate of deforestation, is still bad. I used to kill 10 people, I was a terrible murderer. I now only kill 5 people, I'm still a terrible murderer. It's, it might sound harsh, but that's the reality. So unless we get our thinking to move to a regenerative, restorative, reparative thinking, we won't get there. Yeah. And it's needed, with this World Overshoot Day being August 1. We should be in the repairing mode after that, if you want to. But so that's how you need to run business models. And the companies that get it are doing well. The companies that don't get it, I think, increasingly are heading to the graveyard of dinosaurs. And this is why I wrote this book, Net Positive, which was, it's number 3 on the Thinkers 50. It's the second best-selling book last year in the business front for Harvard. And so it resonates because it comes at the right time to just very practically help companies on how to do that transition. But the longer I look at it, it's a mindset change. It's a leadership issue that is much more important than anything else.
Mm. Hence the reason why you're doing the work you're doing with the 860 universities, right?
Absolutely, it's absolutely key. Rumi, who was a poet in the 13th century in Iran, said it very well when he said, yesterday I was clever, I tried to change the world. Today I am wise, I'm changing myself. And you cannot have a company transformation or a broader systems transformation that is needed if you don't have first and foremost a human transformation. So Wangari Maathai said there comes a time in the history of mankind that humanity is called upon to rise to a higher level of consciousness, as he called it, what I would call a higher moral ground. I mean, there's no better time to do that than now. That's basically what I'm telling you.
Yeah. It's interesting. Paul, you've supported, Peace Monday. Gosh, I think it's probably 15 years now, however long. A long time. And through this journey, there's now 3 billion people aware of the day. The Institute for Economics and Peace, which does the Global Peace Index, which of course that amazing organisation, have said that compared to other days, the 21st of September is seeing a sort of a 15% reduction of violent deaths and rising. And of course, now I realise why you've supported, because your wisdom and foresight, is obviously incredible. And I'm really pleased with those results of all of the work that we've all done. But what did you see in Peace Day, and why do you think it's so important?
Well, you helped me, because the moment we didn't know each other, so the moment I met you, I actually try to remember where we met for the first time, but it just resonated to me right away. And when I said to you at that time already, there's something wrong with this one day, it should be 365 days. And this year, actually, a day more. So there's no question that you have the biggest impact by helping people rise to that higher level of consciousness. And obviously for business, that's an enormously important thing. Business cannot succeed in failing societies. We talked about the costs that are incurred, and you've added many dimensions to it of domestic violence, etc. Because we met each other, I have to give you more credit, because when we were working on the Sustainable Development Goals, I was already connected with you on the piece one day, and in fact with Formula One on Lotus Renault and some other things, which was wonderful. And it helped us develop the Sustainable Development Goals differently. We put a specific goal in, goal number 16, which we call peace and justice. It deals with absence of corruptions, functioning institutions, but we put in domestic violence. We put in absence of wars. And if you look at these sub-goals, it's not a good scorecard, but it holds up a mirror and it tells countries, society at large, where we're falling short. And I've always felt that, running a company, it is our absolute responsibility, wherever we operate, across our value chain, that we have to be drivers of that we have to put our capabilities, our funding, our resources to the availability of society to ensure that we keep these, that we create these environments. When Paul Kagame called me and said, I have an issue in Rwanda that I need to create more livelihoods, I said, we're going to build a tea plantation there and create 80,000 livelihoods, and doing that in a way that allows these children to go to school, that there is health care, that there is livelihood. So we extend these concepts by providing cows, by providing houses, by providing education, by building hospitals. But I can tell you, it makes your business model more robust. When President Santos called me in Colombia and said we need peace with the FARC, we decided to grow tomatoes in Colombia instead of importing them from Chile. And that took us a while, but we deliberately then employed former FARC people. They were protecting the Amazons when they were in the forest because it provided cover. But as soon as the peace was signed, they started to destroy because they needed livelihoods. So you create economic models that are holistic. It's just a little different way of thinking. It's not just where can I get the lowest tomato at this moment in time to maximize my return to my short-term shareholder. No, it's how do you build these institutions for the longer term that also make society function. And that's to the benefit of business. Dar es Salaam was the prime minister of Ethiopia. At that time, they didn't want any foreign company in there. So he gives me a call. And he said, we looked at companies in the world, and we can only find 4 or 5 that we want to invite here because we know that they will work for the long-term interest of Ethiopia. So we came in, and we set up healthcare systems with the 22,000 healthcare workers working on hand washing to avoid infectious diseases with a brand like Lifebuoy, working on toothbrushing, which is half of the absenteeism in schools, is problems with oral care. And we worked on nutritional programs. Not surprising if you now go to Ethiopia, Unilever is the biggest consumer goods company, but it's investing in these societies. And that's a philosophy of doing business that I would call a net positive philosophy. And I've never had a trade-off. The biggest trade-off to me would be not being able to sleep at night because my consciousness would be certainly disturbed if I would run it just for the short-term self-interest. Yeah. So what we are trying to say and what we are explaining in the book Net Positive as well is that this is a huge opportunity now, especially because the costs are so high of our failings to address these issues.
Yeah, it's very interesting. When I hear you talk, and we've done a lot of work together, and we filmed together for all of the different experiences, and I know that we've got Food Day coming up in October. Constructive narrative, right? The status quo changing because of people on the peripheral shouting. writing books, making films. I mean, that's where I've sort of seen, as you realise, my place with the skills that I have is to put out as much constructive narrative we can and tell as many people's stories as possible. Was that one of your motivations? Obviously, you realise that. Oh, change only comes because you read something or see something or hear something, right? I mean, is that why? Was that your sort of motivation for the book? How do I get my story and information to as many people as possible?
Well,
and that's a good vehicle to do it.
Well, frankly, I didn't want to write a book because I've always been very critical of CEOs writing books, because most of these books are out there to change the history or to stroke someone's ego, and both of them are not appealing to me. But it was Adi Ignatius of Harvard Press who cornered me clearly at a moment of weakness and said, you have to write this book. So I started writing it because I felt all the knowledge I have is already out there because I absorbed it by osmosis from other people. So what do I have to add? But the more I started writing the book together with Andrew Winston, the more I discovered actually it's not just a Unilever story, it's about changing mindsets. So we changed our objective of the book much more in terms of creating a movement. That's why we look at net positive education with the 865 universities. That's why we work on these industry collectives around fashion, food, sustainable airlines, built environment, which are basically the most destructive industries, what some people call high abatement. And we work with those industries collectively to drive them to that net positive. So for me, the book it's a leadership book above anything in the end, but it's a book that hopefully leads to mindset change. And we're seeing some signs of that at a modest level. I mean, we've never expected this book to change the world by itself, but many have jumped on the consulting bandwagon. We see companies writing to us. We see measurements coming in. We have schools that have taken the lead. So there are many elements that there's even a club in one of the countries of the Net Positive Club where young professionals get together and discuss their careers and their companies. And that's encouraging for us. I actually do believe that a lot of the pressure for corporates to change will actually come from within the companies itself. That probably is a bigger force than people realize. And it's one of the reasons why one of my foundations did a study amongst 4,000 people, and which we at the end called Conscious Quitting, where we found that about 65% of people in the companies, especially at the millennial, Gen Z, Gen Y generations, will consider leaving companies because the talk is not matching the walk, because the ambitions are not set aggressively enough, because there's no agency given to the younger generation to be part of these solutions. So if you run your companies where 65% of people think about quitting, you are sitting on a ticking time bomb, if you ask my opinion. So if you don't wake up as a CEO to that and try to change your way of running your companies, I have to question if you're worth being a CEO. So these are the type of forces I think that this book is unlocking, and it's actually a pleasure to see. But we have to stay modest. There's a lot more to do. But not possible or cannot be done is a state of mind. It's nothing else. It's a state of mind. And what you do very well with storytelling, which is so important, that narrative doesn't dominate. And that's why these documentaries that you put out have a much bigger impact than some of the numbers you're mentioning.
Interesting. Yes, it's very interesting, Paul. So I would like to ask you. Sorry, the thought that I was thinking then is when you were talking about the CEOs and the companies and the workforce, retaining your workforce. Having a workforce that feels proud to be going into work every day, not just because of the money we make, but also the contribution, the difference that we make. Incredible. And of course, you've realized that, and that's exactly what you're talking about now. It's one of the things that I think to myself occasionally. I think, well, if it was greed that got us into the problem in the first place, it's quite interesting that success is now based on doing the right thing, and that actually, therefore, greed could well save us because it's good for business to do good. I think it was, in fact, Ray Anderson who might have coined the phrase doing well by doing good, right? I mean, there's hope in trying to save humanity because it actually makes money as well. Correct?
Oh, absolutely. So a lot of respect for Ray. Unfortunately, I never had a chance to meet him, but I have learned a lot and had a lot of friends at Interface, and obviously he was an early pioneer in his own way, and the same with Rachel Carlson in the US with Silent Spring, and so there have been some other pioneers. But when we started in Unilever in 2008, there were very few companies thinking about that. So when we came out with the Unilever Sustainable Living Plan to decouple our growth for environmental impact, increase our overall social impact, fairly aggressive targets of reaching 1 billion people, improving their health and well-being, etc., people were stunned because it wasn't really seen as a value-creating strategy for the shareholders. At the same time, we stopped quarterly reporting to get people to think a little bit longer term. So it created a little bit of a level of skepticism or cynicism by some, which was difficult. But the first thing we saw was that it attracted people, high-quality people who wanted to work for us, because people want more than just earning money. They want to make a difference in life at a bigger level than they can do alone. We are herd animals. We want to belong to. We want to be part of. And certainly if that leads to something very purposeful. You know, Mark Twain said there are the two most important moments in life is when you were born and when you find out why you were born. And this is a moment of whyness, if you want to. So we started to attract 2 million people a year who wanted to work for Unilever. We were the third most looked up company in LinkedIn after Google and Apple. We couldn't even understand that because Unilever is not a brand name per se. And then within our company, we saw our engagement scores go from the lower tercile levels to the top of the top tercile levels out of a peer group of about 8,000 companies. Well, it was hard to explain to me, to many of the investors, that alone was driving our shareholder return. Because no CEO had ever really been able to communicate that, or the data weren't there. But on top of that, we worked a more diverse organization, etc. So I think that has been one of the key drivers of the nearly 300% return that Unilever showed during my decade, which, by the way, had every year top and bottom line growth, every year or most of the years outperforming the market or the competitive set in our industry even. So it does pay out, in my opinion. And, so that galvanizing of that change is probably the most important thing.
Doing well by doing good. So yeah, a real chance for humanity on that basis. Then fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So you've talked about corporations. Net Positive. Your book. Obviously, people can read that. To the individuals out there, what's the most important thing that individuals can do? I mean, what would you like individuals to know? I mean, obviously, it's a day of peace. Many of them will observe it. They'll observe the Day of Food, the Day of Justice, the Day of Anti-Racism, etc. But what do you think is the most important thing that the individual needs to understand about the role that they have in relation to our survival? I suppose it might be what Rumi said. If you want to change the world, change yourself, which you talked about earlier. Is that where it's at?
Well, there is a lot out there, and that's sometimes confusing, as we were talking before. But I would say, yes, you need to create a higher level of awareness. Social media is not necessarily helping you. The newspapers are not necessarily helping you. Fake news tend to travel faster. Emotional news or bad news tends to travel faster. So dig a little bit deeper into some of the science and all that you create an awareness of your own consumption patterns, an awareness of your sustainable living or absence of that sustainable living. And then you try to make your changes. Very simple to do. I mean, our house is carbon neutral now. We have solar panels in London. You put the double windows in and whatever it takes. But some people can afford that more than others, but you can do a lot. The way you travel, I came by bus, so it's all these things are all possible. Just have a little bit higher level of consciousness. How you consume things, you can cut out. I've cut out probably 80-90% of the plastics, which is a very devastating thing for society. in many aspects, by the way, that we're starting to discover now that we're eating 1 credit card of plastics a week in the stuff that we're absorbing to stay alive is not a good thing, I can tell you that much. So be conscious of those things and start to adjust the way you live. Then don't preach with the others, but you'll see that the areas around you that you start to affect those and your circle of influence will grow. I think your quality of life will actually improve. Mm-hmm. And then slowly you get into the bigger things. There's nothing wrong to get involved in some of the actions within your companies, which is obviously a great engine to change. And we were looking for those people in Unilever, and I know many other companies, within your sphere of influence, with your friendships, your families, etc. And then you need to be careful where you cast your votes in politics these days. There's a huge difference. Make that a deciding vote. If you care about the future of humanity, which I think is a fairly important issue, then, put your votes to good use. And then, last but not least, advocate. Be out there and advocate for things. And that is not just for climate change, it's also for peace. We've all walked in London now several times because of the tragedy unfolding in the Middle East, which is totally out of proportion. We're fighting for peace in the Ukraine. We're working on Armenia, where cities like Nagorno-Karabakh are wiped off the map by Azerbaijan. We have issues in the Sahel, in Yemen, in Myanmar. So one of the things I'm focused on in a lot of other areas we haven't talked is to look at those areas and to see how we can, because these are our brothers and sisters. It could have been us. We were born there. So you fight for that. And that fight keeps you alive or gives you even more energy to do more. There's 6 places in the world right now where there's genocide. It's just totally unacceptable and totally not needed. And you cannot sit still. I think the most important message I have to individuals is that if you're aware of some of these things, whatever your area of interest may be, and you're in a position to do something about it, whatever that doing something about it may be, you have to. Because by staying silent, or by keeping your heads in the sand, or ignoring these issues, you become de facto complicit to that. And you don't want to be complicit to those crimes. So you have to speak up, you have to participate. That's why it's so dangerous that some politicians say we don't want CEOs to speak up, or this is woke capitalism, or what other arguments are being used. This is actually the time to speak up.
Well, Paul, you've done so much for the world, and it's incredible. And you've done so much for me and for Peace One Day over the last 15 years. And I don't think Peace One Day would be here today if it wasn't for you. And I'm immensely grateful. Thank you for chatting to me today. You are a real inspiration to me, Paul.
Well, we don't do it for you or me. We do it for the millions of people that are losing their lives. Yeah. We do it for the hundreds of millions of people that are desperate, don't even know if they wake up the next day. We do it for the billions of people that are still marginalized and that we'd like to step on, versus lifting their hands and their heads, if you want to. So we're here not for ourselves, that we don't have to worry about. We're here for the ones that unfortunately can't do this interview. So we've won the lottery ticket of life, so it's our duty, it's our obligation to put ourselves to the service of others. I just don't see that differently.
I'm with you, totally, 150%, totally. Well, good luck continuing on the journey that you're on, yeah?
Thanks for what you're doing, thanks for the 25 years, and many more with bigger impact even. Appreciate it. Thank you.